Pipe Network presents.
Life in the Caribbean is great. The warm, the climate, the tropical climates, the breeze, the people, the trees, the nature, the culture, you know. So I was coming from a full of pride environment. I was coming from a rich background.
This is Mike and Ham from Please Pause. Meron kaming munting podcast where we talk about all things TV and film. And despite that, surprisingly, we are still married.
Control freak ka kasi sa podcast na to.
30 seconds lang po ang meron tayo. Pakibilisan.
From blockbusters to classics, superheroes to love teams, hit series to teleseries, join us as we have meaningful and meaningless conversations on the stuff we watched. Someday, mababago ka rin ang tagline na yan.
Check out Please Pause on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other major podcast platforms.
See you there!
Hey folks, welcome to the Rajiv show, and we're going international again, and this time we are going to America again to meet our guest. Such an honor to have her, ladies and gentlemen, Princess Tia. Hey Princess, how you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome. Before we get into the meat and bones of our conversation, I want to take us back to a time-traveling machine and ask you, if you and I were classmates in high school, who were you in high school?
I was a gangster girl. I used to bully out. I used to bully people. But then, when I realized that work is so serious, I became a nerd. At some point, so I took my work very seriously. I'm that easygoing girl, so there are two sides to a story: gangster and easygoing girl. I was more of a nerd. Eventually, when I got back my senses, and senses I mean, I got back my headspace. Hey, we're approaching exams, so I have to get serious at this point in time.
So, from that standpoint, were you competitive? Were you a competitive type of person when it came to exams and stuff like that?
Well, I'm originally from the Caribbean, and Caribbean people is always competitive, and I'm always a competitive person when it comes to group work projects. Exams sometimes, but mostly group work projects, because I'm more of the creativity side of person, So that's me, ever since from high school to university.
You mentioned Caribbean. I gotta ask, how was living in the Caribbean like? I'm so curious. How is life in the Caribbean? Could you give me a visual aid of how life is in the Caribbean?
Sure. So I am from Jamaica, to be
Awesome.
exact, but currently overseas. So, and I'm going to take it way back from a disability standpoint, because I have a disability. So in the Caribbean, it's a great place to visit. But to live from a disability standpoint is really rough, because the unemployment rate is very high. Living conditions can be poor, but it depends on the background you're coming from. At some point, I had a really supporting family, but then when it reached my career, it turned a pivoting point in my life where they wanted to dictate to me. They wanted to take control, and I just couldn't have any of that. So I had to just take the next best move and remove myself from the toxicity environment,
Mm.
and head overseas. So life in the Caribbean is great. The warm, the climate, the tropical climates, the breeze, the people, the trees, the nature, the culture, you know. So I was coming from a full of pride environment. I was coming from a rich background. The point is, when you are in a rich state, you have to know the meaning of life. You have to surround yourself with, in terms of what's life like on a poverty side of level. And I didn't get that. But, I want to tell folks, never forget where you're coming from, and I'm an entrepreneur, motivational speaker, disability advocate trainer, is an award-winning international podcast. So many hats. I have so many hats. But, despite my challenge, I don't allow for it to stop me. And, I'm going to continue, where I left off in life. But, the Caribbean is fun to visit. It's a pleasure to live in the Caribbean at some point. But when you get older, the crime rate is really high. The unemployment rate is really high. So I just had to do further investment in my future. And that's where I am, in the overseas market.
Interesting. So you still live in the Caribbean, or have you migrated into states?
I don't want to say I've migrated yet, but I'm still in the Caribbean.
Awesome. It's very powerful right off the bat. You said never forget where you're coming from. That's very powerful from you. I gotta ask though, where was the turning point that you mentioned in high school? What was that conversation like with yourself? I'm sure there was yeah.
So in the Caribbean, we do a special exam in order to get to university or college or go find a job. And it was reaching what is called crunch time. And I said to myself, hey, let me tone down a bit, because this is the next stage of my life. So I had a talk with myself. I was on a couple of programs to get back my level of confidence, my level of maturity in place, and that's how I began. That was my turning point.
And it's such a powerful thing, right off the bat. Never forget where you're coming from. It's really powerful.
It's really powerful, because when you get so high in society, you have the money, you have the fame, you have this, you forget where you're coming from. And this is what we're lacking in today's society. All these artists, all these celebrities, they live the high life, but when you look back at where you're coming from, you forget.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to, establish in myself and other person's self. Mind you, I'm not going to tell you what to do. That's your business. But when you never forget where you're coming from, just remain, you just humble yourself. Yeah.
Powerful. You're such a powerful person. I love to open up the work of philosophy, and I gotta ask.
Yes.
I gotta ask. I say I gotta ask a lot. I gotta ask, where did the motivational speaker spirit come from? What was the story there?
So I was what is called prefect back in high school. I used to stay with the younger kids.
Yeah.
And I just used to talk a lot. And then, when you're in high school, you have different clubs and activities after school. And there was one called radio. and that's where I started my broadcasting journey. And I used to write a lot and read a lot, and I still do.
Yeah.
And so it stemmed from high school, and it branched it off into university. I've been to a lot of engagements back in university, and then that's how my career began there as a motivational speaker. Mind you, my degree is in business management, or should I say
Yeah.
entrepreneurship. You know, as the entrepreneur, you're taught how to think and create that idea to success.
And you combine motivation in that way.
Yes,
Very creative you are. Interesting. This is shaping up to be an interesting conversation.
it is.
Uh,
And as you mentioned, creative, that was my first business name, Creative Minds Business Development Services.
awesome, awesome. Uh, you're very deep in philosophy. I gotta ask because I do quotations. Is there any philosophical quote that you live by?
Oprah Gale Winfrey. You know, be thankful for what you have, for you will end up having more. But if you're not thankful for what you don't have, you will never ever have enough. You know, Dr. Dale Carnegie once said, you know, I make people smile, I make people motivated, and that's what I do. I like to make you smile, I like to make you motivated. Um, there's so many other people I can't remember right now, but the point I'm trying to make is I love to read, and as a journalist, I have to read what's going on in the world, you know, and one of which is motivational quotes, you know, because and this is how I earn my living, when I read these quotes, I'm able to put them in proper perspective. I remember when I was going to train for the public speaking workshop, and I'm always an entertaining freak in that
Hmm.
I'm always doing adult poetry, or I'm always doing something to
Yeah.
entertain the crowd. And whenever, so you have to recite different pieces, such as an informative speech, motivational speech,
Yeah.
entertaining speech, and whilst doing so, I'm always putting a motivational quote. I'm always putting some song. I'm always putting something in it, because at the end of the day, I want to draw your attention to get the lesson learned. And that's what I'm doing here to you now. And that's what I've done before at different speaking engagements. So that's my secret formula, entertaining and leaving you with something. Because as you just said, what's powerful is I said that never forget where you're coming from. So sorry about that. That's a train outside. But yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Our topic in this series is reflection. And I want to ask you if there was a timeline that you would have changed your course of reality. What timeline of your life would you ever change and why?
I would change the fact. I would change the fact that my parents are overprotective of me, because they have confiscated my passport recently, all because they don't want me to attend any conferences overseas, or they don't want me to see a particular person, So, mind you, my parents have spoiled me. I'm not gonna lie. I miss it. But there have been a time, there has to be a time in my life you know, that you have to let go. And they confiscated my passport. I fainted. I almost committed suicide. I just didn't have that level of freedom. So, but I got back the passport. And then I flew out to the States. No, before I flew out, I was able to make plans to fly out because I want to teach people how to be brave. The Bible says, honor thy mother and thy father. The Bible also says, parents must not provoke their children to wrath. You know, I'm not a Christian, but when it comes to me and my Bible and my God, I know what's best. I know I'm a firm believer of the faith, and I'll tell you that. But the Bible says, don't provoke your children to wrath. And the next day, my parents filed a missing report that I was missing when I'm actually not missing. And I told them that I was going to a couple of conferences, X, Y, Z. The thing is, they were not in support of what I was doing or who I was dating and so forth. So there are many people with disabilities, and they don't have that supporting spirit. You know, I'm looking for a quote here. About change. You know, what type of feelings does the word change bring up for you? And it draws back to your question. You know, what would I change? What's my timeline? So I want to ask you, the public, what's your timeline? And my timeline would be changing the way we think, changing the way how we treat people, changing the way how we treat our families. You will see every day on the news that family swing, family for this and that. It's not about strangers and friends. It's about family. It's always about the family. It's always about what's going on in the home. It's always about what's going on. And this is why a lot of these artists and public figures get themselves into problems, backlashes. We see it every day on YouTube, you know. So we have to, you know, we have to look into where we are now, as you said, timeline. And other persons may say, well, what is he talking about? And I can tell you folks, he's talking about change. How can we change tomorrow? How can we change our ways? How can we change for a brighter future? And the quote here says, let me find it. Change the unchangeable, accept the unchangeable, and removed. Hold on. Let me go again. Change the unchangeable, accept the unchangeable, remove the unchangeable. And this is written by Dennis Waitley. So, in my situation, I had to change the unchangeable. I had to remove the unchangeable. And I have to accept it. And my parents have to accept the changes. It's like a laptop. You know, when you're updating your computer or you want to restart. So I'm at a point in my life where I'm restarting. The laptop is restarting. So it's getting rid of what you have done or what you will. Some persons have saved their work, or some persons have not saved the work. So the laptop just shut it down. It's like I had a problem with my Dell. I got a Dell computer, just a second-hand Dell, and it has been locking me out. I'm like, why is this computer locking me out? you know. So it's like I have to change the computer, accept that I'm changing accept that I'm changing the computer, and just remove it. Right now, I'm using Apple products, iPad, iPhone, that sort of stuff, you know. So I see what works best for me. So you, the public, have to change the unchangeable, remove the unchangeable, and whoever is trying to destroy your movement, they have to accept the changes.
I love it. I feel like I'm a student here in your class, in your workshop. I feel like I that's what I feel right now. I'm really moved by your words. You're very powerful, and it's nice to hang around with you. Just to hang around with you and just watch you,
Thank
observe
you. We
you.
can go on and on and on anytime you're ready.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. It's just interesting because the motivation that I had for this show was to help inspire through storytelling, and within the series I wanted to teach that our past can bridge us for our future. That's the main point of uh, that's the main point that I want to take out of reflect of the season reflection. And and you really put an exclamation mark. It's like I'm in a Jamaican educational class, and it's a different
Yes,
experience.
our Caribbean
Caribbean,
educational
yeah,
class.
yeah. How I envision it
Because
is,
there are many people. There are many people in the Caribbean. There are many people in the Caribbean that have a story, but where is the platform to hear it?
yeah,
You know, that's
yeah,
another thing.
yeah. And I feel like it's just an incredible feeling to have someone powerful enough to share messages, because parallel life, my motivation for this was, of course, I gotta admit that when I started out the podcast, it was pure pure out of boredom when I started it, because it was in the middle of the pandemic. It was during 2020's pandemic, and I had nothing much to do. Everybody was locked at home. Nobody was supposed to move, and it was a tough life. And I was fresh off the boat. When I mean by that was I graduated during the pandemic, so employment was tough because uh, there was no place for a graduate like me, a music graduate like me. So it was a little bit tough. I had it a bit tough. So I was depressed, and then I started getting back into it. I started working on my podcast, and then I found that I started journaling my thoughts through podcasting. And then when I invited guests, I learned that there's a parallel life that I have that I can share with others. And when I hear, it's I don't know how many stories I've heard. Almost, I think it's 50 plus already. Everybody has unique ways of teaching me that life has this sort of parallel understanding. Like you mentioned your life, and the way I look at it is there's a piece of you that is also a part of me. Growing up, high school nerd, I was never that kind of person, but the motivation towards being a better person came from the act of being human. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yes,
So
yes,
there are those tiny parts that you share that are also part of me. So it's really interesting. I just love listening to stories and stories and stories, especially when I edit episodes, because I'm the first guy to hear the episode. So it warms my heart to listen to stories after stories after stories, and it brings out the best it brings out the best in my character. That, oh, this person has shared the same story as mine, and it just became it's just an interesting uh it's just an interesting journey how I see life now after hearing so many stories, because that parallel makes it much interesting. And having you on my show is an honor. I gotta say, this was like a Jamaican uh motivational session. I think that's gonna be the title of our episode, is a Jamaican motivational session talk. It's just powerful. It's just been powerful, and listening to you, it's like I'm I'm moved by your words, and I do agree to a certain
Thank you.
degree that we need change, and it's just amazing. I'd love to extend our conversation, but now Zoom is telling me that we have a timer on our thing before we get shut down. I hope that you come back to my show and we would make a series down the line. I think we're friends on Facebook, so I hope
Yes, we
I'd
are.
reach out and we can make a series and talk about life and philosophy
But I
and
want to do a
people.
part two
Yeah,
on three rules on turning stress into success. And there are some points here in which Dr. Wheatley, Dennis Wheatley has lamented, and I'm going to summarize into my own. But folks, what I did. My parents thought, well, my parents, you know, they think that they're right in what they did is to report that I'm missing.
yeah,
What I knew I did, what I knew I did was right, because I almost committed suicide. I almost done harmful things to myself, and I just had to get out and up and fly. So I just had to turn my stress. I had to use the three rules and turn my stress into success, which is make the change, remove the change, accept the change, right? And I'm gonna lament further on it in our next show.
yeah. And yeah, like I said, I'd love to have you back on my show, and we make a series, because there's so many things that you can unbox, and it's really interesting. And with your Jamaican accent, it really warms my heart, because I'm a huge Bob Marley fan, and I'm taken back to the visual board, that like I'm in a beach and a Caribbean music and the ukulele and stuff like that. That's what I envision. I'm a creative uh, visual thinker, so that's what I see.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
before before we before we end this conversation, of course, my listeners would love to connect with you via social media. How will they find you on social media?
Wow, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. Find me at Princess Tia. I'll send you my link. You can find me at Caribbean Professionals. And this is gonna be a part one, two, and three, because I want to talk about my company in part three. Well, part two and part three. So this is how I'm turning stress into success. And enhancing the welfare of my people, of my company. So I'm around, and I'll send you my links.
Awesome, awesome. I want to say thank you so much for being a part of my show, and
You're welcome.
like I said, I hope I'd have you back on my show. We'd set up a series, because for me, I'm also running out of content, so I'm looking to expand my my content uh, my content showcase by having guests, and it's gonna be interesting. And I want to say thank you for answering my call, and stay in
You're
touch.
welcome.
Uh, and stay in touch. And for those who are listening, I hope you picked up a lot in this conversation. And with that in mind, I want to say cheers, folks, and I will see you in the next episode.